Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. This week, a look at how the U.S. government built a secret city in East Tennessee to work on the atomic bomb.
Of course, it didn't exist when the war started. They had to clear the land and drive out local residents, and it had to be top secret. I mean, secret, secret, secret.
Almost everybody has a favorite cup or coffee mug, but how far would you go to replace it?
So this turned into like a real life quest where each little vendor or shop I went to, they would each give you like a little piece of the story.
And a cabinet maker on the physicality of poetry.
There's music and song and rhythm and meaning to it. And I remember being so moved by that I wanted to start writing poems just to get closer to that sense.
You'll hear these stories and more this week inside Appalachia. Welcome inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams. In August of 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on two Japanese cities. The bombings effectively ended World War II, but also caused catastrophic destruction and killed at least 150,000 people. These powerful new weapons were developed by a government program called the Manhattan Project that had research sites across the U.S., including in Appalachia. Oak Ridge was a secret city in East Tennessee that played a key part in developing nuclear weapons. A new film from American Experience on PBS explores that history. It's called Bombshell, and it details how the U.S. manipulated the public about the bomb's development and deployment. Author Greg Mitchell appears as an expert in the film and speaks with us now. Greg Mitchell, thank you so much for coming on Inside Appalachia.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee was and continues to be a center for nuclear research. Can you talk a little bit about the role it played during the development of the atomic bomb?
Well, it was absolutely vital. For better or worse, we would not have had the atomic bomb without the Oak Ridge project. But, just in a nutshell, when the go-ahead was given to attempt to build an atomic bomb, which was very iffy, we needed uranium, and ultimately they decided some plutonium to help create the bomb. And that's very, very rare in nature. So they had to basically create it. And the key plant, especially at the start, would be in Oak Ridge. Of course, it didn't exist when the war started. They had to clear the land and drive out local residents, which there weren't that many, but the Oak Ridge area was chosen because the power, the Tennessee Valley Authority was nearby, and it was sort of open land, and it had to be top secret. I mean, secret, 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 beyond belief almost. And so the massive spending went into building these very large facilities, very large plants, very large laboratories. It's not, people may have the vision of chemists, in their little labs, with test tubes and all this thing, but it was nothing like that. It was an enormous, enormous project. And of course, also Los Alamos gets all the publicity with Oppenheimer and General Groves and so forth. So probably a lot of people think the bomb was basically created at Los Alamos when, in fact, it was just various scientists and other experts designing and discussing, but they needed the raw materials. And so that had to come mainly from Oak Ridge and then from Hanford, Washington, another secret city. And so Oak Ridge, to do this, what became known, it's very complicated, I won't get into it, but diffusion process, so it's called uranium enrichment, all these very, very difficult processes that had to be done. They needed so many employees and workers that the secret city had to end up having schools and hospitals and movie theaters and grocery stores, everything that would be in a city. And the secret city grew to 75,000 residents. And so there was always an enormous housing shortage, issues like that. It was segregated, as the South was then, but they did incredible work in accomplishing the goals of getting just enough uranium and plutonium to be able to make the early bombs. And then when the war ended, Oak Ridge was still there. Population went down. It continued on. And as you know, they still have many nuclear facilities there today. It's still an important area. I think there's only 31,000 population, but it's a real going city now.
We'll come back to Oak Ridge in just a minute, but I wanted to talk real quickly about the PBS documentary Bombshell, in which you appear. It details how the U.S. government downplayed and pushed back on coverage of its atomic weapons program. So how and why was the federal government trying to influence press reports about the Manhattan Project and the bombings in Japan?
Yeah, well, it was a sensitive area. On the one hand, you had the image and what was put out right from the start, from day one, that this weapon would be crucial in ending the war and saving American lives and so forth. And of course, the atomic bomb itself was secret, so they had to announce both the bombing of Japan and the existence of a atomic weapon at the same time. So as you can imagine, there was massive publicity about it. One part of the documentary is about the New York Times reporter, William L. Lawrence, who had joined the Manhattan Project during its early years and became the chief propagandist. He gave up his job at the New York Times temporarily, and then he went back to the New York Times and wrote pieces based on his inside experience. But he was not exactly an unbiased observer. So there's a section in the film about William L. Lawrence, who is known as Atomic Bill. The American public responded to the atomic bombings of Japan. Some people were appalled that we dropped the bomb over two cities and that the vast majority of those killed were civilians. But probably the overwhelming majority felt that it helped end the war, and that, at least in these cases, they welcomed the use of the bomb, embraced it, at least temporarily. The problem was that we were planning to build more and bigger bombs. And so people were scared about those bombs being used against us and, what would happen with that.
So in Bombshell, there's a section of the film about Harold Jacobson. He's a scientist at Oak Ridge. In Bombshell, you describe him as a junior Manhattan Project scientist at Oak Ridge. No big deal, no K figure. But he does figure into the film and into history. What did he do? What happened?
Probably the main concern on the publicity front that needed to be managed by the government was the fact of radiation with this bomb. They tried to picture it as just a massively bigger bomb, and did not want to focus on the radiation aspects. And of course, that's what made this bomb even more different. They called propaganda and a hoax the fact that Japanese civilians were dying from radiation disease afterwards. And this was a very scary new aspect of the bomb that they downplayed. So it also put the bomb kind of more in the category of a chemical or biological weapon, which is banned around the world even then. And so very bad connotation. Harold Jacobson was quoted as, I don't know if it was originally in the New York Times, but it was in the New York Times and newspapers around the country, claiming that they wouldn't be able to occupy Hiroshima for, I think, 70 years was the number he gave somehow, however he came to that, because of lingering radiation. And of course, we were heading to Hiroshima with our soldiers for occupation, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They're going to be an occupation of U.S. soldiers, so that was especially scary. So there was a flurry of attention for his claim. A few U.S. scientists got in there very early and did readings, which were accurate or not, and Oppenheimer himself they were all quoted saying, no, this is nonsense. So many experts weighed in that Jacobson then his views were pushed aside and largely forgotten. At least he drew attention to the fact that there was a tremendous radiation issue surrounding the atomic bomb.
80 years later, how have these claims sorted out? Was Jacobson right? Were Oppenheimer and the government scientists right? What's your read as a historian?
I've spent a month in Hiroshima, and I can tell you it's an average, very, very large city. Well, people had to move back there like any disaster. You have all these thousands of people uprooted, and they moved back and searched for their families and found some remains, and found in some cases where their houses had stood and all that. So there was a big drive to move back there, and the U.S. in fact sent in an occupying force starting a month or so after the bombing. Studies have been done ever since, and they found definitely a increase in various forms of cancer, various genetic defects, other sort of illnesses and diseases connected to radiation exposure. But there always was a question, was it from the immediate exposure, from the day of the bomb or a couple days after, or people being affected a month later. But clearly there was many, many thousands who were negatively affected by being exposed to radiation after the bombing.
So here in 2025, all these years later, we're still dealing with the fallout from these events, and journalists are dealing with similar efforts by the federal government to control coverage. So what lessons do you draw from this historic episode? What do you think this documentary and this moment in history has to tell us today?
Anytime you have a situation where information is controlled that heavily, is a big problem. The documentary does show how there were some reporters who attempted to break that. And, most famously John Hersey with his famous New Yorker article, and then book Hiroshima. And then the documentary shows how then there was a backlash to that from the officials who then came together and produced a massive response to it that seemed to carry the day. From the late 40s onward, there was kind of a narrative that nuclear weapons were actually a good thing and that they could be controlled. Bombshell is coming out on American Experience, but my latest film is called The Atomic Bowl, is also available on PBS if you go to PBS Online or our local stations, and it's about an all-star American football game played in Nagasaki on January 1st, 1946, and how that was covered up, went into a black hole in history, played on Ground Zero in Nagasaki. So that was just part of this chain of events that kept raising the remembrance of the atomic bombings and had to be, dealt with by the authorities.
Greg Mitchell, thank you for taking the time to come on Inside Appalachia and speak with us.
Well, very, very happy to do this anytime. Thank you.
That was author Greg Mitchell. He appears in the new documentary Bombshell from American Experience. You can find it on PBS. Natural gas drilling has boomed since fracking became a common practice. But fracking has the side effect of generating radioactive waste. A recent investigation into Pennsylvania's gas industry found lax oversight. The Allegheny Front's Julie Grant has more.
The process of fracking a well brings up gas or oil from deep underground. There's been a lot of reporting about the radioactivity and other problems with wastewater from the drilling process.
But there has been a lot less attention paid to the solid waste, even though the solid waste often has similar characteristics as the wastewater, and we are producing huge volumes of it every year.
Kylie Benz is a reporter with Inside Climate News. She recently published a 3-part series taking a deep dive into solid waste from the gas industry in Pennsylvania. How much is there? Where do oil and gas producers send it? And who's paying attention? I asked her to describe this waste.
Solid waste that's created from fracking can cover a pretty wide range of materials, including things like drill cuttings. We're talking about rocks that have been contaminated during the drilling process. Some of this stuff is contaminated by chemicals and by radioactive elements that are coming from deep underground. It can be contaminated with things like heavy metals and radioactive elements like radium.
How much of this waste is produced from fracking companies and other drillers in Pennsylvania?
We found that over the past 8 years, there's been millions of tons of this waste being produced. Because DEP, the State Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania, is very understaffed, they don't have the resources to do regular audits of these numbers. And so while we can give kind of a ballpark figure, we can't say definitively how much the waste is.
In your investigation, what did you uncover about the state's efforts to track where this waste is going?
It was one of those situations where the more you learn about it, the less you feel like you know. The state has a number of different ways of tracking the waste. So one is this database that operators submit their own numbers to. It's a huge database. It's being updated all the time because operators submit monthly. But then there are also a number of other databases and programs that are doing some parts of tracking this waste. It's unclear where and how each piece of waste is being tracked because we have different departments within the Department of Environmental Protection are tracking the waste. And there's not really anybody looking at the big picture and making sure that all the numbers correspond to each other and make sense.
Yeah, and why is it important, do you think, to track?
When there's a spill or a leak or something goes wrong at a well pad, or we have an instance of like illegal dumping, it's a lot harder to figure out where that waste came from, who might be doing it, to enforce regulations around those things if you don't know what the waste is or where it came from, or if you don't have accurate numbers to compare these things to.
And you report that more information is coming out about the radioactivity of this waste. Can you talk about that?
The fracking waste that's being produced over the last few years, it's much more radioactive than the DEP's earlier numbers. It's also much more radioactive than numbers that were used by the federal government in 2011. A lot of the positions or how they're thinking about regulating the waste is based on those older numbers, that older data. So we might want to rethink how we are regulating it. We want to make sure that workers are safe, for example, because they're the ones who would be most exposed to it.
Kylie Benz is a reporter with Inside Climate News. You can find her 3-part series about solid waste on the Allegheny Front's website. Coming up, the quest for a unicorn. A unicorn in a coffee mug. That's after the break. You're Inside Appalachia. I'm Mason Adams.
Support for Inside Appalachia is provided by the Charleston, West Virginia Convention and Visitors Bureau, Charleston WV, where scenic trails and on-the-water adventure meet cultural experiences in the capital city of West Virginia. Your adventure begins here at charlestonwv.com.
Here on Inside Appalachia, our folkways stories come in all shapes and sizes. Often they're stories about passing knowledge to new generations. And sometimes a folkways story can be about something that was lost and then found. In 2024, folkways reporter Wendy Welch brought us this about a potter who lost her mojo and the woman who helped her get it back.
Once upon a time, there was a girl named Ashley who loved unicorns.
I have been a unicorn fanatic since I was a little girl. My favorite movie in the world growing up was The Last Unicorn, and I really feel like unicorns for me symbolize hope.
Growing up in Northern Virginia, Ashley went to the Maryland Renaissance Fair every year with her family.
We couldn't afford to buy things at the Renaissance Fair. So you go every year and you go, I'm going to grow up and become an adult and have adult money and spend it here.
At age 17, Ashley landed her dream job, working in a bookstore. When her first paycheck arrived, she set it aside for the fulfillment of another dream.
I had cash from my job at the bookstore, and I could go spend it at the Renaissance Fair.
Ashley circled the entire fair twice before choosing.
And I bought this blue speckled mug with a braided handle, and it had a little unicorn in it that was sitting in it looking up, and it had crossed legs and cloven hoofs and, just very detailed mane and hair, and it was unique.
Ashley heeded the warnings not to let her mug straddle a pin inside a dishwasher. She took good care of the little unicorn, and it accompanied her to college a couple of years later.
I remember the computer screen light hitting the mug and while I was typing out my reports, and it's just something that I like having next to me when I am writing.
Her junior year, Ashley acquired a roommate, a nice guy who did dishes. One day, he put Ashley's unicorn mug in the dishwasher over a pin.
And when I pulled it out, the whole thing just kind of broke apart into pieces and flew across my kitchen.
Her roommate promised to replace the mug when they went to the fair next year. But when they got there,
the shop was gone.
Ashley could remember the shop's location at the fair site, but not the name. She began asking vendors about the place that sold mugs.
So this turned into a real-life quest where each little vendor or shop I went to, they would each give you a little piece of the story.
This is where the story travels back in time a couple of decades, and from Maryland to Ohio. That's where Ange Campbell first took up making mugs as a hobby.
I was a quiet and well-behaved suburban housewife. I was living in the city of Dayton back in the 1980s. And the City of Dayton Parks and Recreation Department, Fine Art and Crafts Center, offered pottery.
Ange fell in love with the sound of the wheel and the feel of the clay.
And there's a point when everything sings and you get the clay centered and it's not fighting you, and you're literally listening to the clay with your hands. You can do it with your eyes shut. And everything just flows together, and it's a wonderful, fluid, almost meditative tactile experience. And it just makes my heart happy. When I hit that zone, when everything flows, it's like a prayer. That is the point at which work is prayer. And everything you are and everything you have experienced ends up in that clay somehow, some way.
Ange took third place in the Riverbend Art Show. People began noticing her talent. A local artist approached. Did Ange want to join him selling mugs on the Renaissance Fair circuit? Ange wanted to, but she knew her work would have to stand out in a literal crowded field.
So I started including drinking companions. Yes, drinking companions, because everybody and his brother will make a mug. But mine come with someone you can talk to who will never, ever ask you for money.
The little unicorn that captured Ashley's heart was part of a long parade of mythical mug-dwelling creatures.
There are dragons, some of whom are grumpy, some of whom are pleasant, some of whom are downright curious as to why you're drinking their bath water. There are unicorns, mermaids, fairies, fauns. Anything that people can think of ends up in a mug. That way you will always have someone to drink with you, and you will never spend the morning alone.
Fairgoers loved the whimsical practicality of Ange's work. Her mugs flew off the shelves.
A few years into it, my then husband pointed out that I could make at least as much money making and selling pottery as I was making at a retail job. And he was right.
Ange and her artistic partners began circuit riding to Renaissance fairs around the country. Occasionally, she got to put on medieval garb and an Irish accent to banter with customers. But usually, Ange was backstage somewhere working the clay.
It was a case of literally hauling the wheel and the kiln around with us so that when I was based somewhere, I would have the opportunity to work.
Sales were great until the 1990s recession hit. As sales slowly dried up, Ange and her husband divorced, and she made a difficult decision.
The pottery just wasn't going to be making enough money to allow me to continue to depend on that as my sole income. So given a choice between continuing to live indoors and enjoy the immense pleasure of running water and heat and light, I stopped potting full-time and started working again.
Ashley didn't know it, but she bought her unicorn mug the last year Ange sent her wares to the Maryland Fair.
I worked in the photo lab at Walmart, worked in the pharmacy at Walmart, worked as an alcohol and substance abuse addictions counselor.
Ange moved to Lancaster, Ohio, without husband or kiln, and soon pottery became part of her past life.
It seemed I never had enough time or energy simultaneously to go and get the shop set up and make the trip out there to continue to try to work on the pottery. So up until a couple of years ago, I wasn't potting anymore. I was just working. But then something very strange happened.
COVID hit. The American Renaissance Fair community set up a Facebook page so artists could sell their creations online during the lockdowns. That's how Ashley, now living in Virginia with a husband and 2 children, figured she could finally replace her beloved unicorn. She hopped online to restart her search.
All of a sudden, I had access to vendors that were all across the country. I put out the request, I described the mug. I think I got like over 300 comments.
Including from Bill, the artist who had suggested the Ren Fair circuit to Ange all those decades before. Bill was no longer Ange's business partner, but he was her friend and neighbor. Bill told Ashley how to find Ange.
I got contacted out of the blue by an absolutely delightful young lady, Ashley Nolan, who explained to me that she had been trying for more than 10 years to find me.
And she just couldn't believe that I'd been looking for her for like a decade.
Ashley's search had made Ange famous in the online Ren Fair community. People who owned one of Ange's mugs were proudly posting photos and turning down offers doubling the original purchase price. People who didn't have one were demanding details on how to place an order.
And she had to go on her own journey and her own quest.
Ange sat a few months with the news that someone had been looking for her that hard, that long, wanting what she had made that much. Her kiln was in a faraway outbuilding at a friend's farm, covered with dust and a tarp. She had no idea where her clay mojo was. But she liked Ashley, and she remembered the times the clay sang in her hands.
And I got my stuff from my friend who had been keeping everything stored in her barn.
Her friend Bill let her set it all up in his garage.
Bill put in the wiring, and we got the kiln running, and I started pottering again.
Ange fired off a series of unicorn mugs. She also shaped dragons, cats, hedgehogs, and myriad other drinking companions for the community now clamoring for her work. But Ange made sure the first unicorns went to Ashley, who ordered one mug for each member of her family.
Like the day before Christmas, I think, is when I got the package in the mail.
Ashley had told Ange about her children, her son Jerome's passion for red, her daughter Cordelia's favorite book, Honey Bunny. Ange sent a child-sized mug holding a cheerful waving bunny.
And 2 mugs for my son, and with his favorite color red that had different dragons in it. It was fabulous. It was Christmas before Christmas.
Oberon, the son who joined Ashley's family in 2023, will be getting his own mug soon.
Having her create again it felt amazing to be part of that journey and part of her journey too.
Ange and her kilns still live in Lancaster. 5 days a week she works in an office helping people rent apartments, and on the 6th day, she creates things. Ange no longer depends on pottery for her living, which means she can experiment with designs.
I can drag out those notebooks from 40 years ago when my husband would look at a sketch I'd come up with and say, "You can't do that now. You'll never sell it for the price it'll be worth. It'll take up too much of your time. Forget that." So, yes, I still have all those notebooks from 40 years ago. And yes, now I'm getting to play with those.
I'm just so glad she came back to it. She didn't realize how much her art could mean to someone else.
Ashley takes her children on a camping trip to the Maryland Renaissance Fair every summer. She believes the quest of the broken mug put a lot of things back together, through the power of community and the joy of art. Ashley got her mug back. Ange got her mojo back. And we got this story. For Inside Appalachia, I'm Wendy Welch.
That story is part of our Folkways reporting project, which covers arts and culture in our region. You can find more Folkways stories at our website, wvpublic.org. Our Folkways stories showcase people passing on knowledge and skills to others. And some of those skills play a crucial role in local economies, like butchering animals for food. As WVPB's Chris Schultz reports, one West Virginia high school is addressing that need through training in a student-run slaughterhouse.
When driving up onto the ridge above the Cheat River where Preston High School sits, a turn left takes you to the traditional classrooms of the main school building. But a turn right takes you into a world of career and technical education, including the school's mechanic shop, a farm, and something no other school in the state has: a slaughterhouse.
It brings a lot of pride because we're the only one that has the full-fledged slaughterhouse.
Robert Varner is the processing teacher and Future Farmers of America advisor at Preston High School. He says for close to 40 years, the school's processing class has taught students every step of how to safely turn an animal into meat for the dinner table or market.
We bring the animal alive and it goes out in packages. We harvest the animal and everything.
In a classroom where 12-inch knives are wielded as regularly as pens, Varner says safety is key. Students spend a week going over safety procedures before they're even allowed to wrap meat, let alone touch a blade. But with careful attention and time, Varner trains students to use vacuum sealers, grinders, and even eventually a bandsaw to get through big sides of meat. He says by the end of the year, he's just an observer.
By the time they get out of here, I don't have to put my coffee cup down. I hand them the cutting orders. They go get the beef or a hog. They cut it up. I'm sitting there drinking coffee and watching them do all the work.
Along with Varner, a state food safety inspector is regularly on site, especially when an animal is being harvested. Varner says sales of the meat students process, as well as fees for processing animals local farmers bring in, not only pays for the program, but the county's 150-acre farm as well. James Kimball is the director of Wetzel County's Career and Technical Education and Tech Center. He came to tour Preston's slaughterhouse late last year as part of a delegation of CTE educators from across the state.
I wanted to see how they do bring the animal in from start to finish, because that's not a normal process in most high schools.
Kimball says his school and about 30 to 40 others across the state have processing classes where students learn the art of butchering, but not a slaughterhouse. That means Wetzel's student-raised hogs have to be taken up to Pennsylvania to be killed before being brought back for students to process. According to data from the Future Farmers of America, there were 25 meat processing facilities in schools across West Virginia for the 2022-2023 school year. The most recent year data is available. Kimball says a program like the one in Preston is only possible thanks to someone like Varner, a dying breed of agricultural teachers.
They love what they do. The kids love doing the meat processing, and it teaches kids a great work ethic, because you have to come in after hours and make sure your hams, your bacons, everything's cut up, cured, ready to be processed. So it's a dedication by not only the teachers but also the students as well.
Lila Riley is a 17-year-old that has taken up the mantle, or more accurately the apron, in Varner's class. She came in expecting to learn, but says she and her family have been surprised at just how much she has picked up.
You do learn a lot. My family, we kill a lot of deer, we have a farm. It's just something I'd like to know.
In a busy year, Varner says about a dozen students will take his class. Riley says there should be more students taking the class, but there is a certain stigma around working with an animal carcass that high school students are not immune to.
Sometimes when we're on the kill floor, they'll say you stink, but it's all worth it, because in the long run, I know more about killing and processing than they do.
Riley says she can see the benefits of having butchering skills after she graduates, to start a family business, or just cut down on the costs around deer hunting. That's not her plan for now, but she's happy for the opportunity.
I think it's an awesome opportunity. More kids need to get into it. I feel like we need to expand our CTE. This is an awesome program, and kids would love it.
Governor Patrick Morrisey has flagged workforce education and training as a requirement for the state's planned economic growth. And with schools across the state consolidating or looking to upgrade outdated facilities, it's possible West Virginia's second student-run slaughterhouse could be in your community in the coming years. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Chris Schultz in Morgantown.
This year's flu season has been particularly brutal. Cases and hospitalizations are surging around the world, and that may be because of a mutated strain that's more immune resistant. So far, West Virginia has been spared the worst of it. But as WVPB's Maria Young reports, flu cases in the state are on the rise.
If you look at the most recent color-coded map of influenza cases nationwide, West Virginia looks like an island of bright yellow surrounded by states colored in dark red and blue, indicating all of the states near West Virginia are in the throes of a high or very high outbreak. It's part of the largest flu outbreak the nation has seen in 25 years. But West Virginia is experiencing a low to moderate outbreak. To get to another state with similar numbers, you'd have to drive 800 miles, all the way to Vermont, another rural state that currently has low infection rates. Unfortunately, those numbers are not likely to last, said Dr. Stephen Eschenauer, Public Health Officer for the Kanawha-Charleston Health Department.
Because of our rural nature, you don't have as many people in a concentrated area, so it's a little slower to ramp up with people living farther apart and not necessarily in a lot of tight places the way it is in larger cities.
So contagious respiratory diseases like the flu may take longer to spread to West Virginia, but it does tend to get here eventually.
So traditionally, if we see a spike of flu in the country, about a week or two later, we'll start to experience that rise as well. And we've actually started to notice that now in Kanawha County. We now have a flu and COVID outbreak.
It's a similar story in the Parkersburg area, said Dr. Kane Mayers, Associate Medical Director of the UPMC Go Health Urgent Care.
We've started to see more and more cases of the flu, a little more than we've seen in past years. We see all three of the major viral illnesses, flu, COVID, RSD. We see all those this time of year, especially after the holidays when everybody gets together. But the flu is really the predominant illness we're seeing now.
The issue, said Mayers, isn't the cold, damp weather, it's the proximity to other people.
So viruses love to spread person to person. They love it when people congregate and when people are in close proximity to one another. And if you think about it, in the wintertime, whenever it's colder, what do? We're indoors more. We're doing more indoor activities. We're spending more time inside our houses with other people.
Last week, just as the flu was ramping up nationwide, the CDC removed the flu shot and several others from the list of recommended childhood vaccines. Something Eschenauer said doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
We find that very strange, especially the timing. We're at a time when we are seeing the most flu that we've seen in 25 years.
Both doctors recommend the vaccine for most patients, unless there are contraindications that should be discussed with their primary care physicians. Mayers said some patients are especially vulnerable.
Folks that are very young, the very old, pregnant women, people with coexisting health problems like heart disease, asthma, they're all more likely to have severe complications from the flu. So if they can get the vaccine, they'll get the most benefit from it.
Eschenauer said other ways to protect yourself include standard steps like avoiding big crowds and watching for symptoms in those you're closest to.
If you're going to be around sick people, you may want a mask to help protect yourself because flu can be spread through airborne. You will want to use hand sanitizer. That's really important to help prevent transmission.
Patients can still be contagious even after 48 hours. But if your fever's gone and your symptoms are improving, chances are it's okay for you to be out and about without risking spreading the disease. However, if your symptoms worsen, Mayers said, there are some signs you should not ignore.
The alarming symptoms are any fever that does not come down when you take medicine like Tylenol or ibuprofen. So you take the medicine and the fever persists. If you're having shortness of breath, if you have difficulty breathing when you lie down, if you have any chest pain, those would all be reasons to be seen immediately.
Both doctors said if West Virginians can learn from their surrounding states, practice safe distancing, and take some other precautions, it's possible we can avoid the high levels of flu other states are now experiencing. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Maria Young in Charleston.
If you're newly pregnant and haven't been able to afford health insurance, there's a good chance you qualify for Medicaid. The government insurance program has a special application process for those who are pregnant. Reporters Kara Anthony and Blake Farmer discuss navigating what can seem like an unapproachable health system. It's part of a new series from the Appalachia Mid-South newsroom called Health Q.
Blake, fun fact, August is the month with the highest birth rate in the U.S., so do you know what that means for right now?
Well, having a child born in that time frame, I don't even really have to do the math. I think it means a lot of people are just now finding out they're pregnant.
That's right. And when I hear pregnancy, I think healthcare, because we know from decades of research that prenatal care can make a huge difference for the long-term health of both mom and baby.
I don't think I appreciated just how much prenatal care mattered until my own little ones were on the way.
I remember going in for regular checkups when I was pregnant with my daughter Lily 9 years ago. I always felt better seeing the doctor, but to be honest, I struggled to pay our medical bills. I had a job, but didn't make a lot of money at the time. And I wish I had known back then that Medicaid might have been an option. Every state has a program to get pregnant moms with low incomes coverage through Medicaid.
Well, there's actually research that suggests not everyone who qualifies for Medicaid knows that they do.
I spoke with Matea Brooks in Illinois, and that was the case for her. She went to a nonprofit when she found out she was pregnant.
They asked if I had insurance. I didn't know anything at the time, so I was just like, no, I don't think so. And I guess I seemed a little timid and scared. They were just, real helpful. Like, here are some phone numbers to a Illinois department that could help you with that.
She called the state agency and went in person to apply. Her coverage started that day.
Okay, so once you're in, what exactly does Medicaid cover?
It really depends on the plan, which we say a lot with Medicaid. Matea didn't have to pay for any of her appointments, medication, or delivery. And I talked to another new mom, Ashley Farrell. She lost her job when she was pregnant and applied for Medicaid in Georgia. Her plan offered mental health care and other benefits.
Mine gave me a free breast pump. You can get postpartum supplies. Also, you get rewards for going to your appointments. They give you like grocery cards or gas card. Or some of them give car seats or strollers.
Sounds like a pretty positive experience. But I do know from my reporting that not everyone feels this way about Medicaid.
Right. It can be complicated and stressful even if you qualify, because it can be hard to find healthcare providers who accept Medicaid and are accepting new patients. But if it works out, it's one less thing to worry about in a season that's exciting and also a little scary.
That story was produced as part of the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom, a collaboration between NPR and several public radio stations in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. For more, visit our website, wvpublic.org. Steve Scafidi has spent nearly 40 years dividing his time between writing poems and restoring old furniture. The West Virginia poet and cabinetmaker is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including his latest, The Appalachian Sea. Bill Lynch caught up with Scafidi to talk poetry and working with your hands.
Would you like to read something?
Sure, yes. I'm going to read a poem from my new book called The Appalachian Sea. And I'm a cabinet maker. I've worked for over 30 years for the same man. And we work in an old dairy barn. There's about 15 of us. Well, mostly we work on old furniture. We build reproduction furniture and we rebuild, 20th, 19th, 18th century furniture. But behind our shop is this catalpa tree. One summer, there are these caterpillars that form what's called catalpa moths, or sometimes people call them catawba moths, and they're giant moths. So one year, this tree was full of the caterpillars, so full that if you went outside, you could hear them chewing. This is a poem about me discovering this and calling out my buddy to look, and what my buddy does. Of cabinet makers and caterpillars. The gigantic fat caterpillars on the catalpa tree moved and writhed like green baby dragons on every leaf. And you could hear them chewing. There were so many. And you could say, hey, to your friend Todd, busy inside the barn, and call him out to see. And sure enough, he'd come out to the catalpa just behind the silo and say, what? And then, holy as he took his index finger and started to rub the back of the fattest green caterpillar you've ever seen and say, hey there, fatty, you're just a green hunk of pudge, aren't you? And yes, I am. I'm the fattest hunk of pudge you've ever seen. And I'm going to eat this tree down to nothing. Just you watch. And while he keeps the conversation going on both sides, he rubs smooth the spiky hairs on the back of the thing now bucking under his finger, the broad leaf leaping up and down, so the great moth caterpillar, a winder of silk, endures our wonder, patiently waiting for it to end. When his wingspan comes, he'll have only a week to live, flying and falling through the night air like a wind-blown image of magnificence without equal. Until then, there is work to do. Will Todd go back inside and polish that mahogany table? Yes, he will. Am I going to hear the hammer and the saws and turn the finial of a pine clock and remember this tree? And do we live toward loss and never understand? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do.
Usually I ask to tell me about the poem, but you sort of kind of gave a preamble to it, right?
Yes.
So why choose that poem to share with us?
Well, it's one of my favorite from the book, I think, because it captures what most of my life is, which is probably true for anyone listening, is work. I'm at work all the time, and I'm sure you are. And that's the way our world is, or our country is, and our state. And so I'm always there. I'm always working. And so I have a few poems in this book about that place because work is so much a part of my life. And this work is one that I enjoy, and I'm lucky to enjoy it. But it's also kind of funny, and so is my work and the people who I'm among, who I love very much. So I like to point at them and appreciate them.
You're a cabinet maker, as you have mentioned. How long have you been a cabinet maker? How did you get into that?
I started working. My boss, the man's name is Nick Greer, and he has a business called Nick Greer Antique Conservation. And that's what we do. We build and rebuild furniture. And I started there I'm 58. I started there when I was 20. So that's 38 years I've worked there. And I went off to college and did things, but I always worked in the summers and all my breaks, Thanksgiving, Christmas break. So I've been there 38 years, and back in my county, it has grown up and is gentrified. It's Jefferson County, West Virginia, where I live, and it's the home of Harper's Ferry and John Brown. There's so much development there now. But when I was growing up, the only jobs available to boys were agriculture and construction. And so that's what you did. So I remember a friend of mine wrote down this man's phone number on a matchbox. I was a smoker at the time. And I had the number, and I called him, and he said, come on in. And I walked there from where I was living. And he hired me just like that. And I started working there. And, the funny thing about longevity in a workplace is it's curious to me why people stay where they are so long. And it's either, you're stuck or else it's choice, And I remember essentially my first day, my boss had cut his index finger off on his right hand as a young man working as a cabinet maker. So anyway, on the first day, he and I were gluing something that was on a round, and it was hard to clamp. So it was like a 10-minute epoxy. So we had to kind of hold it with our fingers. So he had 10 fingers of his own, or 9.5 of his own on it, and he wanted 10 more to hold it firmly. And our fingers are interlaced, holding down a piece of veneer over a round. So his stub is next to one of my fingers. And Nick, my boss, during those 10 minutes, it was awkward. I didn't know this guy. I'm just holding it. We made a little conversation. And then he put his stub on my finger. He rested it on my finger. And it was such a strange moment. He looked at me and he kind of smiled. And then he took the stub off of my finger. That went on for 10 minutes where he would kind of put his stub on my finger, just messing with me. At first, I was so horrified. And then it just made me belly laugh. And I thought, this is an interesting place to work. And so I've stayed there that long, partly because of the people are lovely and fun. And the work is intriguing. So,
when did poetry enter your life?
About that same time, I was kind of at loose ends as a young man. Went to college for a semester and I didn't like it. And I dropped out. And then I started reading wildly. And I started reading out loud, and in particular poems. And I read some Walt Whitman one summer, his Leaves of Grass. I read the whole thing out loud. And I've never been the same, to be honest, after that. There was something about poetry's one thing read quietly in your head. It's a whole other beast when you hear it spoken to you, or you hear yourself speak it. It vibrates your skull. There's music and song and rhythm and meaning to it. It's like this sublime kind of dance. And I remember being so moved by that I wanted to start writing poems just to get closer to that sense. And then that meant too, I started reading more, and then my life just started to shift and change. Even though I stayed at the cabinet shop, something, a kind of sea change was going on inside me.
Is there any kind of connection between the two occupations? Between cabinet making and working with wood and also working with words?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think so. I think that I find poetry to be very much maybe 80% physical. I find that words themselves, we're so used to the quiet words that we read as readers, but mostly as we live our lives, we're talking and speaking and listening. And it's this physical life of words. And I find that poetry is no different. And I find that the cabinet making, I'm constantly working with my hands, and there's rough work and there's fine work. And I find that the same is true for writing as well. Most of my writing is rough and dumb and doesn't work. And I find that I get lucky sometimes and things come together. But I think that is ultimately the continuity between the two, is the physical labor of both.
With furniture and either making new furniture or I guess refurbishing it, you have to have a plan. You have to have an idea, right? So with poetry, do you go seeking the poem, or does the poem find you?
That's such an essential question, really. I mean, I've taught poetry in many places, and that's the kind of question that comes up. As a teacher of poems, I will often provide prompts to students, like, let's get ourselves started all on the same page, But I think ultimately, I'm drawn to things, or I am confused by things, or I am magnetized by subjects, and I can't stop thinking about them. There's a kind of there's an obsessive nature to it. And I think that's what happens. I think it is what I can't understand, what kind of dazzles me and makes me wonder, I can't let go of sometimes. Like, for example, what happens after we die. I think I've written about that so many times. I think every poet does. It's kind of like, and every person thinks about it and wonders about it. It's a part of our nature. And so I think that, I'm just kind of drawn to things. And you know what? I kind of surrender to like some phrases in my head. And I think, oh, there's this music in my head, this sound in my head. Maybe it's going to lead me to some kind of sense in the world. Listening to the voices in your head and taking them seriously is really what a writer does, I think. And that's what I do. But I trust what I don't know. I trust my curiosities, I guess.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. That was really a lot of fun.
Steve Scaffidi's book, The Appalachian Sea, is available from LSU Press. Till next time, thanks for joining us as we journey throughout Appalachia. Our theme music is by Matt Jackford. Other music this week was provided by Jeff Ellis, Eric Vincent Huey, Blue Dot Sessions, Paul Loomis, and Hello June. Bill Lynch is our producer. Abby Neff is our associate producer. Our executive producer is Eric Douglas. Kelly Libby is our editor. Our audio mixer is Patrick Stevens. We had help this week from Folkways editor Jennifer Gorin. You can find us on Instagram @InAppalachia. You can also send us an email to insideappalachia@wvpublic.org. Visit wvpublic.org/InsideAppalachia to subscribe to our newsletter and stream all of our stories. Or look for Inside Appalachia on your favorite podcast app. Inside Appalachia is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.